This is land. This is financial speculation. Something we do with Kinky.
Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack.
Honk, 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 honk. Where's your money?
That would be weird.
Ha, 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 ha. Ha, 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 ha. Let's see. I eat bars of soap for breakfast. I love bars of soap. After midnight, things get weird.
Quack, quack. Oh no.
Let it go. Let it go. Cock.
I like that one. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack.
Come on, ducks. And we are live on Land Speculation on YouTube. And tonight, after years of planning and waiting and wondering when we would finally get to it, tonight we are going to launch a new series on land speculation, the Bible Streams. We're going to do the Bible Stream, guys. Exciting at long last. We've been talking about doing this for a very long time, and so as they say, let there be a Bible stream, and there was a Bible stream. And I don't want to set expectations too high, but I think this could get pretty interesting, especially as we get into some of the meaty content in follow-on streams. We're actually going to get into some of the contents of what's really in some of these stories that comprise the Bible, which, I think while we could say subjectively is the most consequential book in human history, I think we could also probably say that objectively that the Bible has been by far the most impactful book in the history of humankind. And so, on a stream in which we love to delve into things of consequence, of history, of meaning, and more, and, things that guide the ethics of our everyday world, it's about time I think we do this. So we're going to dig into it tonight. There will be follow-on episodes. I have already started putting together a lot of content that's going to go into some follow-on episodes on the Bible. We're going to try to tell the Bible in ways that you've probably never heard it. I feel like there's a lot of Bible content on the internet, and there's sort of a sweet spot for me anyway that's missing in terms of Bible coverage out there. And we're going to try to hit that sweet spot as best we can. So we got some folks here in the chat already. Jeanette Quiet Castle, Ken Brown, congratulations. You guys are the medal winners tonight. Jaws is also here. Timmy Tushu is also here. And presumably millions lurking in the background. And welcome, guys, once again to Land Speculation on YouTube. If you wouldn't mind dropping a like and a subscribe on the video as we are out of the gate here, I appreciate that. Those likes help us out with YouTube. Those subscribes help you guys know when we are on. And, of course, check the description, as always, which has links to other useful things like our Discord, our Duck Fund, and links and such. Anyway, welcome, guys, once again. If you missed our stream the other night, we talked the other night about Trump's shoes, Trump's new shoes. Very exciting. I don't know, they're like gold-plated or something shoes. I was saying they reminded me of the famous God's shoes that Al Bundy presented in one of his many ill-fated episodes of Married with Children. And perhaps it's a nice conduit between the world of Donald Trump and politics and Joe Biden and all that stuff that we talk about all the time, and the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, which shifts gears a little bit, and we'll start doing some of these Bible streams as news breaks. We will break in with newsy stuff too. But I think it's maybe important in a year when we're trying to make consequential decisions about the future of our country, about the future of us as individuals. Maybe we'll learn something here as we delve into the Bible. So, anyway, guys, I don't want to like hold back here. Let's just delve right in, because I think the Bible has lots of very interesting stuff. And it's a tough stream to do. It's tough to stream here about the Bible, in part because the Bible is a gigantic book. Depending on which version you get, it has something in the order of 783,000 words in it. And it is a monster of a work of writing and stories and allegories and all kinds of stuff. And it's like, how do you even dig into talking about the Bible in a way that's going to be meaningful or useful to people, in the style and spirit of this stream? And I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that. There's probably no good way to just delve into the Bible as a topic. The Bible, of course, a very, very, very impactful book. Even if you didn't grow up, learning, reading, and worshiping from the Bible, you have no doubt encountered one at the very least in the nightstand drawer of your local hotel room. I did. About 10 months ago, we asked on the stream here what the Bible means to our viewers. As you can tell, we've been planning this out and sort of talking about doing a Bible stream for a very long time. 10 months ago, we asked you guys, what do you think about the Bible here on our channel? And we got some feedback here. We had 125 votes on this poll. 54% of our viewership believes that the Bible is the sacred Holy Scripture, an inspired Word of God. Obviously, the Bible is just that, to literally well over 1 billion people around the world. So the Bible's pretty damn important. Particularly if you do believe it is the sacred Holy Scripture, an inspired Word of God. We're going to try to talk about the Bible in ways that kind of acknowledge that and are respectful of that. We also had 17% of people who just kind of wanted to kind of acknowledge maybe that the Bible has tremendous kind of historical importance, that it's a really important framework for civilization. I think we'll talk a little bit about the historical context of that as we delve into the Bible as well. 14% of people think the Bible is interesting, but kind of hocus pocus. Maybe people who don't believe that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. There's a lot of kind of crazy stuff in the Bible, and we're going to delve into some of the crazy stuff in the Bible as well, because there is a lot of that kind of stuff in the Bible. We also had some people that said they thought the Bible was just nonsensical, bigoted pablum. God isn't real and the Bible is dumb. 10% of people really kind of anti-Bible. And then 6% of people who voted, again, this 10 months ago, said they believe in a different holy book. And even if you do believe in a different holy book, it is hard not to acknowledge that the Bible, of all the holy books in the world, probably is the most impactful. Because while there are other large religions in the world, and Islam remains the fastest growing religion in the world, Christianity remains the most popular religion in the world. You put together all the Catholics and all the Protestants, and Christianity is by far the biggest religion in the world. And by land area, it certainly covers the greatest share of land in the world in terms of its the footprint where it is the predominant religion. There are parts of Africa, the Middle East, and particularly Southeast Asia where other religions predominate. And yet, even in a lot of those places, the Bible is still a very important book. Of course, it shares a kind of historical lineage story with the Quran to a point, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into some of these streams. So, the Bible matters. We'll get in as we go through these streams a little bit more. We'll get into some of the kind of more historical reasons why the Bible matters, as well as some of the quantitative reasons why the Bible matters. But the point is, the Bible is the most impactful book in human history, and it's not really close. And so, why are we addressing the Bible? Well, that's why. That's why. So, where do we kind of dig into the Bible here? And again, guys, if you are just joining us on Land Speculation on YouTube, we are delving into the Bible stream, something we've said we were going to do for a long time. We're finally beginning it. We're definitely not going to finish the Bible tonight, but we're going to do our best to get as deep into it as we possibly can. So, what is the Bible? Well, it is an assemblage of 66 books and stories. Well, it's the assemblage of a lot of different kinds of stories, but it is divided into 66 books, at least insofar as the Protestant Bible says. If you believe in a different version of the Bible, there are potentially more books. Now, I was raised on the Catholic version of the Bible. That had 73 books, 7 more books in the Old Testament. If you believe in the Orthodox version of the Bible, that's 86 books. And if you believe in the Charismatic version of the Bible, that's 76 books. The Bible is a collection of writings and stories and all kinds of stuff that was gathered from a virtually infinite universe of writings and scrolls and stories that existed in the days when it was compiled. And so it's kind of, it takes some judiciousness. Like, imagine if you were trying to write, like, a single book about the history of the United States. You obviously would have basically an infinite amount of writing and histories and chronicles and firsthand accounts you could potentially include. You could potentially include, thousands and thousands of chapters in such a book. But you would have to find a way to winnow it down. And so the Bible attempts to winnow down the sort of sum total body of stories and books and things that were out there at the time. And so it is that it is approximately 66 books and surprisingly well curated. One of the things that I don't think I ever really grasped as a kid was how much intentionality went into the curation and organization of the Bible. I think if you open up the Bible to like a random page and you read some like random story or some random little song or psalm or something like that, it kind of feels like the Bible is this like almost impenetrably random collection of stuff. But that is not the case. The Bible actually has tremendously specific and thoughtful organization to it. And we'll talk a little bit about why and how the Bible is organized in the way that it is. Anyway, 66 books in the Bible. That's a big number. Basically, the Bible comprises 5 different things. And I guess I never, I spent 12 years of school studying the Bible. And I just never, they delve into the weeds so quickly. They delve into the details of the stories. And I just never really kind of had a grasp on the plot of the Bible. And I will take as a given that may have been on me. That may have been my, lack of ability to comprehend or understand the big picture of the Bible. But If I didn't get it, I'm probably not alone. I'm probably not alone. So basically, the Bible has 5 things in it. As best I can sort of surmise, the Bible has 5 things in it. One of the things the Bible has in it are allegorical stories about the creation of the world. Now, these kinds of allegorical stories basically fill up the first half of the chapter of Genesis. I should say the book of Genesis. These are stories like the creation story, Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, Cain and Abel, the Tower of Babel, Noah's flood, all these kind of iconic stories that are probably even when they were told, were not really intended to be literal. Even if they were believed as being literal. They were probably basically a collection of allegories designed to kind of make a nice, neat, little, tidy connection between the sort of human recognition that, like, there had to be something that existed or didn't exist before the earth and before all of us. And hell, and like now there's like all of us. There's like the whole world. So something had to happen between like 0 and us. And these stories basically in pretty short order try to more or less parse the beginning of time all the way to like the complexity of human civilization in the present day. And that's a lot. And that's a lot to tackle in very short order. And the Bible managed to do it in about half a book. Basically get from like the creation of the entire planet to more or less like setting up an understanding of contemporary societies. And when I say contemporary societies, I mean societies of like 2,000 years ago. But nevertheless, on like a cosmic scale. Societies that are pretty modern. And, you know, in doing so, they kind of develop an explanation for like how the world got here. You know, what the hell God was thinking. How humanity got created, and then how humanity kind of got like weird and messed up. Like how we got to the point where we all have these bad instincts and all these, you know, just uncomfortable aspects to how we live. Like, you know, why childbirth hurts and, you know, why men and women are different and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, like, yeah, the stories are kind of crazy, but pretty impressive that the Bible is basically in short order able to get from 0 to the point where they could start like telling the story of a society, and it more or less flows pretty continuously. So that's the first thing that's in the Bible, these allegorical stories about the creation of the world. The second thing that happens in the Bible, and this begins basically about halfway through Genesis, and basically runs through the entire rest of the Old Testament, but in terms of histories, it takes the Bible about 17 books to get through basically the history of the nation of Israel, from more or less the beginning of people until about the year 500 BC, where the Bible kind of stops telling the story. Basically, the first 17 books of the Bible, minus that very beginning of Genesis, tell the history of the nation of Israel. Basically, this tribe of people that kind of emerged from Abraham, went to Egypt, then walked out of Egypt, then wandered the desert for a bunch of years, and then basically conquered a whole bunch of enemies to set up a society that basically is sort of the ancient bones of what we now know as Israel. And there's a lot of stories, a lot of history. A lot of history gets very, very, very detailed. And this is like the core crux of the Old Testament, is the history of the nation of Israel from about the year 2000 BC, which is basically when Abraham happens, until about the year 500 BC. And the year 500 BC is somewhat significant because that's about when these little small tribes that roamed the desert, like the Babylonians and all these different little tribes that are in like the Old Testament of the Bible, finally give way to the rise of the Roman Empire. It's somewhere between about, 600, 400, 300 BC, when these sort of major kind of empires start to rise up. You get the massive growth of like Alexandria and Athens and Rome. And that's kind of where the Bible stops, for a little bit anyway, telling the history of the story of Israel. It's also the period in which the Bible, the Old Testament of the Bible, basically gets authored. So you had all these stories that basically were being like shared by word of mouth up to that point. And it's basically somewhere around the year 400, 500 when all those Old Testament stories start to kind of get compiled. And then the first versions of the Old Testament actually kind of get authored like around 200 BC. And those, again, they tell basically these allegorical stories, the history of the world, creation of the world, the history of the nation of Israel over the course of about 1,500 years. Then they kind of pause on the history for a bit. And then they just kind of throw in alongside all the history about 20 books, which are predominantly comprised of more or less just like poetry, philosophy, songs, and then like a whole bunch of prophecies that were all kind of prevalent during these sort of ancient development of the tribe of Israel. So you get like the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, and then you get these sort of prophetical books like the book of Isaiah that basically, you know, start to kind of put some things in very lyrical tones, these sort of prayers that people used to pray to God back in those days, and also these sort of prophetic visions that like Jesus is coming, or something is coming. And you start to get to like the end of the Old Testament, and you get kind of angsty almost. Like it's like they think something's coming, but they don't quite yet know what it is. And meanwhile, they're trying to live this world which is full of all these like draconian laws. Because part of what the Old Testament does, especially in the early part of the Old Testament, is set up like all of these extraordinarily specific and rigorous laws. And we'll get into sort of why the Bible sets up some of these rigorous laws. And it's not just random. It's not totally that God is just like this really demanding guy. There's actually like this very epidemiological purpose to a lot of it. Like the Bible is one of the first great books of like societal construction and public health that ever existed. The Bible gets like really, really, really obsessed with circumcision in the early part of the Old Testament. But they're also obsessed with all kinds of other things that would have been like major public health missions in that time. And so that's sort of the foundation of a lot of the rules and laws that people like to pull out of books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Anyway, the Old Testament, basically allegorical stories about the creation of the world, the history of the nation of Israel, and then a bunch of like poetry and prophecies from that time. And then you sort of pivot gears because then you get to the New Testament. And the New Testament basically skips 500 years. You basically have like nothing in the Bible really from the year 500 BC to about 0. And then you have like these Gospels that in great detail tell the story of the ministry of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was born, I mean, I guess we now say Jesus was born in like the year 0-ish, give or take a few. He didn't really start ministering until about the year 27, then he died at 33. So most of the Gospels, other than like the birth story, basically cover about 6 years of Jesus' life. And they get into a lot of detail about kind of all the stuff that Jesus was doing. And how much of this was like literal truth, that Jesus was performing all these miracles, and how much of these were just stories kind of designed to help spread the faith, I don't know. But we get a lot of sort of history of the life of Jesus in the New Testament. That comprises basically the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 Gospels, and then the book of Acts, which is sort of the epilogue at the end of the 4 Gospels. It tells the story of Jesus' disciples after he passes away. So that's kind of the beginning of the New Testament. The rest of the New Testament, basically all of the rest of the 27 books of the New Testament, are basically just letters from Jesus' disciples, basically trying to convince other people in other tribes, especially like Romans, that they should become Christians, trying to sort of explain what Jesus was all about, why he did all the Jesus things that he did, and basically trying to just like convince people. There's a whole bunch of these letters in the New Testament from Paul, who frankly might be like the most important person in the entire spread of Christianity around the world. And we'll get a little bit into exactly how that all worked. So, again, sort of 5 things the Bible has. You know, it's 66 books. It seems really complicated. There is a whole bunch of crazy stuff in there. And over the course of these Bible streams, we're going to get into some of the crazy stuff in there, because there is a lot of crazy stuff in the Bible. Say, not just like crazy laws. There's crazy laws, there's sort of prayers, there's like a very vengeful spirit of God. There's God like celebrating the conquest of enemies in incredibly violent and brutal ways. There's God like basically commanding that you stone people who, like, God's commanding that you stone unruly teenagers at times. And then God's sort of also demanding that you love him, like, very, very, very dearly. It's like all kinds of stuff in the Bible. But basically, the 66 books come down to these 5 things. Kind of an allegorical story about the history of the creation of the world, the history of the nation of Israel in sort of more literal terms from the year 2000 to about 500, collection of poetry and prophecies that the Israelites used during that time, the history of the life of Jesus, and then a bunch of letters from Jesus' disciples advocating on behalf of the faith. So I felt like that when I learned the Bible growing up, while I learned all kinds of details of all these little stories that are in the Bible, one of the things I was never really taught was actually just the basic structure of what the heck is in the Bible. And so I thought it would be useful to at least do a little rundown that this, in fact, is kind of what's in the Bible. John Celeste, you did not miss the Old Testament yet. What we're doing tonight, in part 1 here of the Bible stream, is basically background on the Bible, some why does it matter, a little bit of kind of base understanding of what the heck the Bible is all about, and hopefully if we do this, it'll kind of cue us up so that we can start really digging in. And I'm going to basically sort of tell the entire story of the Bible. Hopefully, if there remains interest in this, we're going to try to tell the story of the Bible basically from beginning to end. And we're going to try to do it in like a really honest, real, land speculation-y way. You know, we're not going to beat around the bush. We're going to dig into it, like real time, real talk. But we got to do some stage setting here first. So that's kind of what tonight's about. So stay tuned with this, guys. If you're interested at all in the Bible, if you're kind of looking for like whatever you're looking for, if you want to sort of really understand like the religious kind of deeper messages of like what's really going on here in the Bible, this series of streams is going to be very interesting to you. If you are just looking for some crazy stories to be told, like what they're really getting at, if you just want to sort of like know all the crazy stuff that happens in the Bible, this is also going to be very interesting for you. If you want some like deep kind of historical context for like what are they really getting at, this is also going to be for you. There is stuff in the Bible that people don't even realize is in the Bible. There's like an entire chapter, an entire book of the Bible that I almost never hear talked about that is basically the like raunchiest version of 50 Shades of Grey that I could ever imagine. Like, and we'll get into that. The book Song of Solomon is one of the books of the Bible. Not one of the ones that I learned growing up. But man, is that a very, very, very sexual portion of the Bible. Anyway, this is basically what kind of goes into the Bible. 66 books, 5 basic themes. Okay, how's the Bible organized? Well, you guys know the Bible has basically an Old Testament and a New Testament. And by the way, guys, again, if you were just joining us, if you've been waiting for the Bible stream here for a couple of years, this is Land Speculation on YouTube. We are finally digging into the Bible. And if you wouldn't mind dropping a like and a subscribe on the video, I do appreciate that. The likes on the video help us out with YouTube. The subscribes on our videos help you guys know when we're on. If you haven't joined our Discord, please feel free to do that. That link is in the description. And the Duck Fund, of course, is our 24/7... No, the Duck Fund's our PayPal link if you want to donate. We appreciate the contributions there to our Duck Fund. So please feel free to, contribute there as well. But Aquinas is pointing out that there's 73 books. According to the Catholic version of the Bible, we tackled that little factoid out of the gate. If you want like the most Bible for your buck, Your best bet is either to be like an Orthodox Christian, because then you believe there are 86 books. Or if you want to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, then you'll actually have a whole third testament of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, which we're not going to tackle as part of these streams. Although that would make a very interesting stream, so maybe if there's enough interest, we will eventually get to that too, because I think it is very interesting. Anyway, we're tackling basically the Protestant version of the Bible here, although I was raised on the Catholic version, so I also understood there to be 73 books. But the Protestant version of the Bible basically takes out 7 of the Old Testament books. There are 39 Old Testament books, 27 New Testament books. And they are basically split into this kind of organization. We talked a little bit about this in sort of higher level terms, but if you need to sort of parse out the entirety of the 66 books, here's what's going on. Basically, the first 5 books of the Old Testament are basically all history. The first half of the book of Genesis, as we said, is this sort of old allegories about the creation of the world. From the second half of Genesis through the end of Deuteronomy, basically we're tackling the history and the laws of the ancient Israelites. The Israelites that basically started with Abraham. They wander kind of through the desert. They end up in Egypt. Then Pharaoh's real mean to them in Egypt. And so eventually they make their way out of Egypt, thanks to a few little tricks up the sleeve of God. They end up wandering the desert for 40 years. And while they're wandering the desert, they have a whole bunch of like laws that get imposed on them, including the 10 Commandments. That's all within the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Then the end of Deuteronomy basically is where the end of Moses happens, and you transition to Joshua. And you basically go through 12 books which tell the stories of about 1,000 years of the history of the nation of Israel, from the time they leave the desert and they enter Canaan, and they start building basically ancient Israelite society. They have a period where they're ruled by judges, and then a period where they're ruled by a whole bunch of famous kings. This is like Solomon and Saul and David, all these sort of famous figures from kind of old ancient Israelite history up to about the year 500. So we're about 17 books into the Bible. We pivot again to these sort of 5 books of like poetry, Proverbs, philosophy, things like that. The book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, which again is sort of the 50 Shades of Grey of the Bible. And those are all just kind of like things that would have guided the Israelites as they were kind of making their society back, 1,000, 1,500 BC. And then you have a whole bunch of books which are basically just like prophecies at the end of the Old Testament. They're little shorter books. Then you get the New Testament. You get your 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are the stories of Jesus' life. The book of Acts, which is sort of the historical follow-on. And then you get a whole bunch of books which basically are just letters from Paul, mostly, but also a few letters from Peter and from John and a couple other people, basically proselytizing the faith, spreading the faith to the Corinthians and the Romans and the Galatians and the Ephesians and the Philippians and the Thessalonians, etc., all these sort of ancient societies. Spread the word of God and spread the message of Jesus across the world. This is another just little graphic that kind of parses out how those chunks of the Bible split out. And since we just talked through it, we won't go back through these right now. But these basically sort of reinforce what I just said about these sort of collections of books. And when you start thinking about the ordering of the Bible this way, there actually is a lot of intentionality to how it's organized. The Old Testament was kind of curated loosely about the year 200 BC. The New Testament was gradually curated in the first few hundred years after the death of Jesus Christ, until we all kind of settled in on this Bible thing. And there was a whole bunch of writing, of course, at both times that tackled a lot of the same subjects that is not included in the Bible. And we'll talk a little bit about how they made those selections here in just a moment. The longest books of the Bible are pretty long. The Bible as a whole is about 783,000 words. The book of Psalms is the longest book of the Bible, and that's basically like a book of poetry. little axioms and sayings and things like that. So it kind of makes sense that would be a long book. But that's in the Old Testament. You got a couple of the books by these prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah. Those are all prophecies about the future. But then the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, all 5 are very, very, very long books because they have to tackle a lot of content. I mean, the book of Genesis basically takes you from the beginning of time up to about the year 2000 BC. That's a lot to cover. Anyway, a lot of very, very, very long books in the Bible, but also a lot of really short books. And you think about these books that are like 40,000 words. You have a whole bunch of books that are like only a few hundred words, too. Some of these are books that are basically like not very important prophets in the Old Testament. And then a few books that are basically letters from John and some of the other, I guess, disciples of Jesus Christ spreading the word after he passed away. They're very, very, very short. And I don't quite know why exactly they, kind of get the same gravitas within the Bible as these bigger books. They're 40,000 words, but there are some pretty quick ones if you're looking for a quick read someday. In terms of like these chunks of the Bible, the longest books on average are the first 5 books. Genesis through Deuteronomy, about 30,000 books, 30,000 words on average. Big, big, big chunk of the Bible, actually. A lot of the historical stuff, very, very, very long. But a lot of the minor prophets especially, and these letters from Paul and some of the other letters in the New Testament, the epistles, are pretty short in comparison. So the books are kind of all over the place. Like, they really are not of equal length as you kind of get through the Bible. And just to sort of understand like how the Bible is telling history, you get a lot of history that feels very, very, very wordy, talking about like really, really, really ancient Israel. But if you sort of parse it by year, you're only getting about 246 words per year. As you get deeper into the Old Testament, that period of like King David, around 1000 BC, you get 430 words per year. And then the period that's like Jesus, you get like almost 1,500 words per year. Like the Bible really is like there's a lot of Jesus in the Bible. Like per capita, Jesus gets a lot more coverage than anybody else, even though there's a lot more in the Old Testament than in the New Testament. So Jesus is like a big deal. Okay, what are the best parts of the Bible? The best parts here. So we used like a proprietary methodology. We went like deep into the annals of the internet, and we scoured a lot of stuff. And we basically were able to kind of do a quite actually quantitative scoring of which books people think are the most significant, the most impactful, and the most interesting reads of all the books in the Bible. And as it turns out, this is the list of the highest ranked books in the Bible. The book of Genesis makes sense. That's like a pretty important one. The Gospel of Matthew, also a pretty important one. That's probably the most comprehensive of all the Gospels about Jesus Christ. It is not my favorite. My 2 favorite Gospels are the Gospels of John and Luke. And when we get to those Gospels, as we delve into the Bible in upcoming streams, I'll tell you why. The book of Psalms is very popular. The book of Proverbs is very popular. Those are Old Testament kind of narrative things that kind of, they're like they're poetry, they're philosophy. A lot of the axioms that you hear are from those books. Book of Exodus, it's basically the plot of the movie The Ten Commandments, is pretty highly ranked. The book of Revelation is pretty confusing and also pretty highly ranked. The book of Job is kind of bizarrely popular. And it's kind of a weird book. It's basically a book of like this poor guy named Job that basically just gets tortured endlessly. And God is like, forces him to go through like all manner of like horrible ailments to himself, to his family. He gets like medical afflictions. He loses all his money. His family falls apart, and somehow he like doesn't lose his faith. And at the end, God's like, "Nice job, Job. You didn't stop believing. Like, good for you. I'm going to give you everything back now." And for some reason, that's a very inspirational book to people. Anyway, these are the highest ranked books of the Bible. As that sort of parses out, the books that people seem to think are the best books, on average, the New Testament Gospels, the whole sort of life of Jesus stuff, that really is kind of the core of the Bible. So, that stuff gets pretty highly ranked. The Old Testament poetry, the Psalms and the Proverbs and stuff, that's pretty highly ranked too. And then the book of Revelation at the end gets a pretty high ranking as well. Now, the beginning of the Bible also gets a pretty high ranking, but you have to kind of parse it out. Because the historical part of Genesis and Exodus, where you're like learning about the creation of the world, pretty highly ranked. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, where you're basically just learning about laws and rules about how you can cut your hair and, where you can sit when a woman is menstruating and, how you have to worship and how you're supposed to circumcise people. All that stuff gets a little bit lower rated. In fact, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, only a 0.36. A lot of support for Proverbs, Psalms, and Job, Ecclesiastes, and Revelation here in the chat. Yeah, those are all pretty highly ranked, I think, by the general public. So, all good stuff. All good stuff. And again, we're going to sort of dig into all this. We're going to kind of go through the entire Bible as we delve in. So, this is just kind of our overview beginning, guys. There's a lot to delve into here in the Bible. What is this? This was like, I think this is by word. Per word of the Bible. Which books are the most highly ranked? New Testament, much, much, much higher sort of bang for your buck. The words matter a lot more in the New Testament, in part because the New Testament isn't chock full of genealogies and laws quite as much. New Testament's like a lot more content and meaning. So, especially as you get like into some of the letters, some of the stuff that Paul writes, for instance, that kind of explains like why Jesus matters and like why you should believe and things like that. That's pretty good bang for your buck if you want to read some of that stuff in the New Testament. That's where you'll get like, some really, really, really good stuff. Rainmaker loves the book of Daniel and the prophetic books. Well, welcome, guys. Lucky, Rainmaker, Michael, General Pubic, Calming the Chaos, Jay Luther, let's see, Timmy Tushu, James Dean, John Celeste, let's see, Ken Brown, other folks here in the chat who I didn't have a chance to introduce earlier, Bequeathius, David, and let's see, who else, as I scroll back here. Jaws is here. Yeah, awesome, guys. Thanks for joining us here on Land Speculation on YouTube again. We're sort of delving into the Bible here. Again, this is sort of background Bible, the first of multiple future Bible streams. This one might be kind of the driest of them because this one's going to be the least storytelling. This is us just kind of doing some stage setting here as we delve into the Bible. But we're going to go through the whole thing. It's going to be interesting. We're going to do it in real talk. Walk through the entire Bible. Hopefully it'll be interesting. Anyway, this is sort of like, I'm trying to give you sort of a cheat sheet here. If you want to read like bits and pieces of the Bible, you want to get the bang for your buck, go for the New Testament. Go for the New Testament. Although there's some very interesting stuff in the Old Testament as well. Again, these are the highest ranked books: Genesis, Matthew, Psalms, John, Proverbs, Romans, Luke, Exodus, Ecclesiastes, Revelation, Job, Acts, and Mark. The lowest ranked books in the Bible, ones you've probably never heard of. Most of the lowest ranked books in the Bible are some of the minor prophets books in the Old Testament. A lot of these books are very short. They tell stories that are not particularly consequential. In some cases, they are like individual prophets that sound like they are basically just trying to like talk up their own role. Some of these books only cover like about 10 years of actual history. So, I think for good reason, some of these are the lowest ranked books. Okay, how are the books of the Bible selected? And guys, again, if you haven't dropped a like and a subscribe in the video, I do appreciate people doing that here, because there is some research that went into this. Of course, as we dig into the actual Bible, there's going to be even more. Okay, how are the books of the Bible selected? Well, the Bible basically started, as you can imagine, because it is a pretty darn old thing, as a series of word-of-mouth stories. When you think about like the creation story, and a lot of the stories that are deep into the Old Testament, a lot of that stuff started being passed around by word of mouth, going back to dates that we don't even know what they were. But several thousand years ago, people probably started telling some of these stories. And at the time, they did not have the luxury of like modern, history, modern sciences, et cetera, et cetera. So they were trying to explain some of the history of the world through stories that would make it all make sense. So it makes sense that they invented some of these stories that you read at the beginning of the Old Testament. So a lot of this was passed down by word of mouth, including some of the genealogies you find in the Old Testament, which are incredibly tedious to read. One of the things that I did about a year ago, in fact, one of the things that I did when I was recovering from appendicitis is I basically I started trying to listen to the entire Bible as a series of, what do they call them? Audiobooks now. I was going to say books on tape. That's what we would have called it back in the day, but audiobooks. And there was a time when I thought maybe the most interesting way to do the Bible would be to just like read it on the stream. And that's before I realized how freaking long it would take to actually do that. To get through like Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus as an audiobook, each of those is like 6 hours long. They take a very long time to get through, and a lot of what you read is incredibly tedious. Not just genealogies, but these like incredibly detailed measurements of God telling the Israelites to build something in this particular way. All this was sort of developed through word of mouth, and then eventually people started kind of figuring out ways to write things down. So there were a lot of scrolls when you start getting back, several hundred years, a couple thousand years BC. And by the time you got to like a few hundred years before the birth of Christ, some of these people that were trying to like compile some of these stories were basically trying to like sift through various scrolls that existed at the time. Obviously, didn't have printing presses yet, but some of this stuff started being commonplace enough that you had a lot of it sitting out there. And certainly, after the life of Jesus, you had a lot of these kind of scrolls and stories and things that were sitting out there. It was like a whole universe of stuff you could have potentially picked from. And so all this stuff had to go basically into the funnel. Like, what really was the inspired word of God? And how do you know if a particular piece of writing or a particular story was the inspired word of God or just a story that somebody made up who was a charlatan? So part of the crux of like synthesizing the Bible down to what it is today, and when I say down, again, 783,000 words is a lot of words, but it could have been a lot more. But you had these councils that started coming together, both for the Old Testament and the New Testament, that had to sift through a lot of content and figure out what they wanted to include and how they wanted to include it and why. Now, when it comes to the New Testament, they say there are different criteria for what was included and what wasn't. Particularly things that were written by the apostles or by people who directly firsthand knew the apostles. Jesus had his 12 apostles. Orthodoxy of doctrine, basically. Does it all kind of tell the same story? Was it actually like widespread? Was it widely used and known and accepted among the Christian communities? And did it conform to the rule of faith? Now, you can imagine some of these early church councils had a lot of discretion to determine sort of what would go in and what wouldn't go into the Bible. And so you start hearing some of these stories, and this is a lot of what like the Da Vinci Code is about, that there were stories about Jesus. There were also stories in the Old Testament that told slightly and in some cases very different versions of what happened. And in some cases, the things that some of these stories said veered wildly from what the church leaders wanted people to believe. Did Jesus Christ, for instance, have a wife? What was Mary Magdalene's role? Well, there are several alternative gospels that tell stories of Jesus' life that include all kinds of other components, including Jesus potentially being married and things like that. How much of that's real? How much of it's not? I don't know. Certainly one of the famous ones, the Gospel of Thomas, is a sort of very famous excluded gospel that tells a lot of things that otherwise would be very controversial. A lot that's controversial both about Jesus' sort of extramarital life, Jesus' potential marital life, as well as sort of the general relations between men and women. Some of these, the rejected gospels, make things out to be a lot more sexist than the gospels that are included in the Bible. This is just, part of the Gospel of Thomas here. Simon Peter said to them, "Mary should leave us, for females are not worthy of the life." Jesus said, "Look, I am going to guide her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every female who makes herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, there's probably some translation stuff going on here. But why are females not worthy of the life? Why are only females who make themselves male worthy of entering the kingdom of heaven? I don't know if this is like, early promulgation of, transgender advocacy or quite what's going on here. But there are sort of passages like this that show up in the Gospel of Thomas as well as some of these other excluded Gospels that are very controversial. Very controversial. So, we don't really know. And we could probably do endless streams digging into things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the contents of the Gospel of Thomas and others of there were hundreds of accounts of the life of Jesus. Some by people who were very close to Jesus, some by people who weren't. And some of them tell very different stories. Again, we could do infinite streams trying to parse out what is the church hiding from us? What actually went on that would have made perhaps Jesus look less holy? What actually went on that would have told a different account of his life? But I actually don't find that all that interesting. Because, frankly, one of the things I find the least interesting about the entire Bible is trying to parse out what's literally true and what's not literally true. Because I don't really think that's the point. It's not what makes the Bible the most significant book in human history, and it's not really the most important thing to kind of underpinning the lessons that the Bible is trying to teach people. So it's possible. There could be a lot of things that have either been, that were either written in ways that weren't true or that were highly curated after the fact. And at the end of the day, who really cares? It matters. But I think there are other things that are more sort of interesting and impactful about the Bible. We're going to sort of focus more on kind of the content of what's actually in the Bible. However curated it may be, whatever may be excluded, we're going to talk about what's in the Bible. Now, what's in the Bible and how it's told does vary depending on the translation of the Bible. There are versions of the Bible that are very literal to the original writings from which they came. Probably all the original writings, even those, are not necessarily word for word to a lot of the original stories that were spread by word of mouth. Anybody who's played the game of telephone knows that stories can change a lot when they are spread through word of mouth. But there are versions of the Bible that are sort of very much intentionally paraphrased to be able to be more easily understood by the masses. Some of the versions that are largely deemed to be kind of the best balance between, legible but also beautiful, like the King James version, are kind of closer to the word for word. I don't really like the versions that are just sort of sheer easy reading. But as we tell portions of the Bible here on Land Speculation on YouTube, we're going to try to delve in and tell these a little bit through real talk. So we're going to give you some of the actual contents of the Bible, and we're also going to tell you what they're kind of actually getting into. And we're going to give you guys a chance to comment as we get into some of the actual stories on upcoming streams. Okay. Why does the Bible matter? Again, this is part of our stage setting here. This is the first of the Bible streams here on Land Speculation on YouTube. We have been talking about doing these for a couple years now. At the beginning of the stream, we showed you the poll. When I thought we were going to do these about a year ago, we did a poll about what you guys think about the Bible 10 full months ago. And you guys told us that about half of the people on our stream believe that the Bible, in fact, is the inspired word of God. And about half of the people who are on a stream maybe don't. Many of them acknowledge its really significant historical impact. We also have some folks here who think the Bible is kind of pablum. And so, as we always try to navigate issues around land speculation on YouTube, we're going to just kind of talk through it as real as we can. It is certainly the most impactful book in human history. And so that I think is very, very important. So what makes the Bible so important? Well, it has tremendous, tremendous impact. Some of that is spiritual. If you believe the Bible is the inspired word of God, that spiritual impact makes it by far the most important book in human history. It is, frankly, there's not any other book that could even come close. If you believe this is the inspired word of God, the Bible holds special resonance to you. And even if you don't, you have to acknowledge the Bible and its mere impact in that billions of people literally believe it is the inspired word of God and have built their lives around its messages. The Bible is a tremendously important historical book. It sets a lot of kind of sociological, foundational understanding of kind of how to build a functional society. That's important. It tells the story of a very important period of human history. And it sets in place a lot of the basic core tenets of the ethics that underpinned not only that era, but basically the entirety of the Western tradition. Like the foundations of our society, to varying degrees, stem from the Bible. Okay, spiritually, if you believe God actually has sort of a say in the authorship of the pages of the Bible, that makes it very, very, very significant. Historically, the Bible tells a period of a pretty important period of human history. I mean, obviously the Bible, in theory, is sort of telling from the very beginning of time. But basically, we think the stories in Genesis basically trace to about 10,000 BC. That's when people started sort of telling some of these stories by word of mouth. The story of like Abraham, which is sort of the first like real person we think maybe that was talked about in the Bible, it's about 2000 BC. And then again, we got that sort of period of about 1,000 years of kind of ancient Israeli history from 2000 BC to about 1000 BC, and then actually I guess maybe another 500 years to about 500 BC. That's like really deep, detailed history that's in the Bible. And that's an important period of history, and I'll tell you why here in a second. Then you got the New Testament, which is basically all encompasses about 100 years, from 0 to 100 AD. These, I've included the population of like the entire human population in the world that existed at each of the periods of the different books of the Bible here. When the stories in the book of Genesis first started being discussed, there were only around 1 million people living on the entire planet. So basically, like, when the Old Testament first starts kind of talking about stuff, like, the entire world was basically the size of the city of Dayton, Ohio. So, is the Bible confined to the stories of a few finite tribes in a very small area of the world? Yes. But at the same time, like, there actually weren't that many people in the world at that time. So, the proportional impact was substantially larger. Over the course of the Old Testament, basically humanity expanded by a gargantuan amount, from about 1 million people to about 300 million people. Like, that is a huge, huge, huge explosion of humanity. So when you think about the books of the Old Testament that talk about basically how to kind of set up a society and how God, as an idea, was used in the formation of setting up societies. That's really, really, really important. Because that's frankly when most of human society was being basically developed. Since the New Testament, obviously humanity has exploded by a massive margin. But I think it's worth noting that since the authorship of the New Testament, humanity has grown by about 226-fold. During the lifespan of the Bible itself, the stories within the Bible, humanity grew by about 300 times over, from 1 million to 300 million people. So it's a very, very, very important period of human history. It may not look like it on an exponential graph of human development just because so many people and so much human development has happened basically since about the year 1600. But that arc, that sort of explosion of humanity, that sort of birth of humanity, the seeding of humanity, basically is kind of what the Bible is all about. The Bible tells that story basically of how we all got started and how we all developed. Now, the Bible is confined to this very, very, very small period of the world. Basically, all the stories of the movements of the Israelites from Egypt into the desert to Canaan and Jerusalem and all these different tribes all comprise like a really, really, really tiny figment of the world. I mean, that all happens within this tiny red spot. A few hundred miles we're talking. And so you hear all these detailed accounts of all these tribes that existed back in that era. Well, on the one hand, it's very, very, very small. On the other hand, pretty impactful. The Bible became significant in part because that part of the world became very significant, because it developed pretty rapidly, and then no sooner had it developed than it basically got swallowed up by the Roman Empire. Where the Old Testament stops telling history is basically where the Roman Empire starts swallowing up all these tribes that comprised Israel and its various neighbors. And that was sort of the key to the spreading of the Bible. You had stories that were very impactful in their own right among the most prosperous society within that small region, that then got swallowed up by a much larger empire. And then this really significant figure that emerged, Jesus, about part of the way through, that sort of used the masses of the Roman Empire as sort of kindling to kind of expand this faith by massive, massive, massive margins. And so what happened over the course of the spread of the Roman Empire is that you went from basically maybe 1,000 Christians in the world. About 10 years after Jesus' death, he had about 1,000 Christians. To within about 300 years, that number increasing to about 34 million people. You had basically nobody in Rome that was a Christian at the beginning. To within 300 years, about 57% of Romans who were Christians. And that was the key. That was the key to launching it all. And thus Christianity spread around the world and became the most populous faith on the planet. It split up into all its various sects and became the foundation of the world we know today. Now, I have read this before. I have read this piece of writing before, but it is an incredibly important, I think, piece of writing. It's one of my favorite pieces of writing. It's printed in the Wall Street Journal every year around Christmas. And it is the story of how basically the biblical accounts of Jesus Christ became something that not only transformed the Roman Empire, but transformed the entire world. This is the piece called In Hoc Anno Domini, an editorial written in 1949 and published in the Wall Street Journal every year since. When Saul of Tarsus, who we know as Paul, set out on his journey to Damascus, the whole of the known world lay in bondage. There was one state, and it was Rome. There was one master for it all, and he was Tiberius Caesar. Everywhere there was civil order, for the arm of the Roman law was long. Everywhere there was stability, in government and in society, for the centurions saw that it was so. So basically, this is like the framework Rome, the most powerful empire humanity has ever known. It is also a ruthless empire. Everywhere there was something else too. There was oppression for those who were not the friends of Tiberius Caesar. There was the tax gatherer to take the grain from the fields and the flax from the spindle to feed the legions or to fill the hungry treasury from which divine Caesar gave largesse to the people. There was the impressor to find recruits for the circuses. There were executioners to quiet those whom the emperor prescribed. What was a man for but to serve Julius Caesar? There was the persecution of men who dared think differently, who heard strange voices or read strange manuscripts. There was enslavement of men whose tribes came not from Rome, disdain for those who did not have the familiar visage, and most of all there was everywhere a contempt for human life. What to the strong was one man more or less in a crowded world. Rome was a brutal society, an effective society, but a brutal one. Then of a sudden there was a light in the world, and a man from Galilee saying, "Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." And the voice from Galilee, which would defy Caesar, offered a new kingdom in which each man could walk upright and bow to none but his God. "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." And he sent this gospel of the kingdom of man into the uttermost ends of the earth. So the light came into the world, and the men who lived in darkness were afraid, and they tried to lower a curtain so that man would still believe salvation lay with their leaders. But it came to pass for a while in diverse places that the truth did set man free, although the men of darkness were offended, and they tried to put out the light. The voice said, "Haste ye, walk while you have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walketh in darkness knoweth not whither he goeth." Along the road to Damascus the light shone brightly, but afterward Paul of Tarsus too was sore afraid. He feared that other Caesars, other prophets, other men, might one day persuade men that man was nothing save a servant unto them, that men might yield up their birthright from God for pottage and walk no more in freedom. Then might it come to pass that darkness would settle again over the lands, and there would be a burning of books, and men would think only of what they should eat and what they should wear, and would give heed only to new Caesars and to false prophets. Then might it come to pass that men would not look upward to see even a winter star in the east, and once more there would be no light at all in the darkness. And so Paul, the apostle of the Son of Man, spoke to his brethren, the Galatians, the words he would have us remember afterward in each of the years of his Lord. "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty, wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage." So this was the juxtaposition, the ruthless, effective, long arm of the Roman law, societies that for centuries, and now in more sophisticated ways than ever before, were developing things, and yet which were distinctly cold, harsh, brutal, oppressive, anti-human, which forced people to live and think in certain ways. The emergence of Christianity was powerful in Rome because it freed those who otherwise saw very little hope in their lives. It gave people the freedom to think what they wanted to think, and no matter how much their lives sucked, to believe that there was some kind of purpose for it all. It also helped humanize what was an incredibly ruthless world in which the value of human life was very, very, very small. This was the power of Christianity as it emerged. And so what was significant about the Bible? Well, for one thing, the Bible tells the story of the way that ancient people explained the origins of the world. For another thing, it tells good basic rules and practices that helped establish early societies around the world, how people organized themselves, the kinds of laws that people developed for civil living, basic hygiene practices, and we're going to get into some of the crazy laws in Leviticus that basically are early epidemiology. Strategies to sustain and grow the tribe. There's a lot of conquest in the Old Bible. Beliefs, axioms, and writings people relied on. The early Psalms, the kind of stuff that kept people living even in the darkest periods of human history. And then, most importantly, it established this Christian ethic, the foundation for society, the foundation for basically all of modern society, the stories, the parables, and the axioms that helped humanize the world and create a balance between basically the ruthlessness of the old world, the selfishness of human instincts, and the need to sort of civilize ourselves and be nice to each other and value human life at least to some degree or another. All right, the Bible is neither the longest book nor the oldest book in human history, but it is very close to being both. In terms of the oldest books in human history, the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Republic by Plato are both older, for the most part. The Bible was mostly written somewhere between 200 BC and 100 AD. It was written well before the Quran, as well as most of the other great books we would think of in human history. The Prince by Machiavelli, the complete works of William Shakespeare, The Wealth of Nations, the Constitution, the Communist Manifesto, The Origin of Species, Mao's Little Red Book, 1984. There's a lot of books you could say are great books of human history, but the Bible is among the oldest. It is not the oldest. And in terms of just being like a great old tale, I think you could make the case that the Iliad and the Odyssey, some of the old Greek epics, things like that also have a lot of value. The Republic by Plato has a tremendous amount of historical value. The Bible's a lot longer than those books, though. It has a lot more in it. It is certainly one of the longest books. It is not as long as the complete works of William Shakespeare, but it is very, very, very long. It is longer than virtually any, fiction novel that's ever been written. It is also, by far, it may not be the longest, it may not be the oldest, but it is by far the most read book in human history. The Bible has sold between 5 and 7 billion copies in its history. That is vastly more than any other book, including the Quran. It dwarfs the Quran. It dwarfs Mao's Little Red Book, which was obviously very widely spread in China. I was a little despondent to realize how many copies Harry Potter has sold. It is among the highest-selling books in human history. There's some other very, very, very impactful books. I mean, the Communist Manifesto, for all of its impact, has only sold about 30 million copies. So the Bible, by far, is the most prevalent book in human history. And what makes the Bible so unique is not its length, it's not its age, it's not even how impactful it has been. Maybe it's the fact that it includes more different kinds of things in one synthesized, comprehensive narrative than any other book that has ever existed. Because in the Bible, you get a lot of bang for your buck. You get history, you get allegory, you get genealogy, you get laws, you get judicial precedent, you get proverbs, you get prayers, you get songs, you get letters, you get visions, you get prophecies, and you wrap a big bow around all of it that this may be the inspired word of God that basically gives you everything you need to know in order to live a fulfilling life that can grant you eternal salvation at the end. I mean, that's a hell of a good deal, guys. Find any other book that's going to give you all of that. It's a hell of a lot. Okay. Again, guys, you're watching Land Speculation here on YouTube. We are doing part 1 of what's going to end up being probably a many-part series on the Bible. We're doing some stage setting here tonight. We're going to basically, from here on out, we're pivoting into the actual Bible and some of the content, some of the raunchy, some of the meaningful, some of the important stories. Lessons, poems, proverbs, prayers, all that kind of good stuff that packed full in the Bible. We're going to get into some of that. There is food in the Bible too. A lot of good stuff. In the Bible. If you wouldn't mind on this stream, dropping a like and a subscribe on the stream, I appreciate it. I hope this stage setting is interesting. It might be a little drier than when we start getting into some of the actual stories, because the stories are very interesting. But if you wouldn't mind dropping a like and subscribing to the video, I appreciate that. Those help us out. The likes help us out. The subscribes help you guys out. Make sure you have your notification bell turned on. you haven't joined our Discord, please feel free to do that too. That link is in the description. And if you haven't also contributed to our Duck Fund, there is also a Duck Fund. And you can contribute donations on behalf of our stream, and we appreciate that. So please feel free to do that. Just a little bit of a teaser here for what we're going to get into over the course of the coming streams here. Some of the most significant stories across the Bible. There's the creation story, basically how it all begins. There's the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve and all that kind of stuff. How we went from basically living this utopian existence as God's chosen creatures into committing our first sins and thus for kind of damning ourselves into a life of, suffering to some degree. Cain and Abel, Noah and the flood. And God kind of realized maybe he didn't get it all right and people were being bad, so he had to drown everybody. Noah and the flood. You don't hear a lot about the pain and suffering of all the people that drown in Noah and the flood, but anyway, it's a compelling story nonetheless. Worth a visit to the Ark Encounter. Giant, full-scale replica of the Ark, 510 feet long, down in somewhere in Kentucky. I've been there. Fascinating, the Ark. Find out what we actually did. The Tower of Babel. How we all got our languages. The call to Abraham, and basically the birth not only of Christianity, but also of Judaism and also of Islam with Abraham. Maybe the most important figure in the Bible, at least of the Old Testament. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which kind of pops up randomly amid the story of Abraham. Abraham and Isaac, when God basically tells Abraham to sacrifice his own son on an altar, which seems awfully brutal, but that happens. Doesn't go through with it, but it almost happens. Jacob and Esau, escaping slavery from Egypt. That's a big one. Moses leads all the Israelites out of Egypt into the desert, all the plagues. Man, Egypt really went through a time there, getting subjected to all those plagues. The whole story of Passover and stuff, we're going to get into that. I find that a really disturbing part of the Bible. The whole Passover thing. And then, of course, the birth of the Ten Commandments. Very, very, very important part of the first few books of the Old Testament. The Ten Commandments actually show up twice. People don't realize that. The Ten Commandments show up twice in the first 5 books of the Bible. David and Goliath, as we get into the stories of ancient Israel once they were in Canaan. The rise of King David, David slaying Goliath. You get some of these early judges, early kings. Solomon, when he has to decide what to do about the baby and he wants to chop the baby in half. That's kind of a fun one. Daniel in the pit of lions, another good story. Jonah and the whale. My 3rd grade play was Jonah and the whale, and I had to dress up as a citizen of Nineveh. We were very bad. Citizens of Nineveh are very bad. And Jonah was given a task, but then he gets swallowed by a whale. Amazing story. And then, of course, you have basically some 50 Shades of Grey stuff going on there in the Old Testament. We're going to get into some of the details of that, because that is very raunchy, and you learn a lot about breasts and bosoms and, entering the garden and things like that. So we'll tell you some of the literal content of 50 Shades of Grey as it shows up in the Bible, in the Old Testament. There's a lot more in the Old Testament, too. There's a lot of good stuff in the New Testament as well. The birth of Jesus Christ. As they say, the greatest story ever told. The story of the birth of Christ and the Christmas story. That shows up, by the way, very differently in each of the 4 Gospels. The story we all think and believe about the birth of Jesus Christ is this sort of weird amalgam of multiple different Gospels. Except for John. John just kind of skips it all. Not sure why. Jesus running away from his parents and hiding in the temple. There's a lot of Jesus in the temple back in those days. There's Jesus like hiding from his parents in the temple. There's Jesus like tipping over the tables in the temple. There's Satan tempting Jesus. There's a lot of there's a couple instances in which Satan goes like one-on-one with people and tries to get them to falter. We've probably all encountered, a version of Satan trying to get us to falter. And you're going to find out if Jesus gives in or not. Jesus feeding the masses. There's like several different versions of that. Jesus turning like one loaf of bread into something that can feed 4,000 people. Jesus turning one fish into something that can feed 5,000 people. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. I always kind of wondered, is he actually just taking a single loaf of bread and chopping it into really, really, really tiny pieces? Because it wouldn't be very filling, but I guess you could kind of do it that way. Or did he just did nobody know about yeast and Jesus he put yeast in the bread and suddenly the bread got gigantic? Could have been that too. Jesus heals various sick people. There's many different versions of that too. Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. There's Jesus and the tax keeper guy. Lots of very interesting stories like that, and the plot is not always quite what you think it's going to be. It's always a little bit of a head scratcher. Jesus walking on water, which shows up a couple times in different Gospels, so we know it's true. The wedding at Cana. Man, imagine how rich you could get if you learned how to turn water into wine. The Good Samaritan. Okay, the prodigal son, I believe, is one of the most perplexing stories in the entire Bible. To make, to sort of reconcile the prodigal son is to be able to kind of really digest the entire Bible. There's a lot of injustice that happens in the Bible. There's a lot of injustice you have to endure while keeping your faith. It's one of the major themes across the Bible. The death of Christ. The betrayal, the Last Supper, carrying the cross, the trial before Pontius Pilate, and then ultimately Jesus getting nailed to the cross, dying, being buried in the tomb, and then magically resurrecting 3 days later. Yeah, I think there's a lot of very interesting stuff that happened. I think one of the things that we focus the least on out of the Bible is basically what happens after Jesus, gets put to death. Because there's the whole period where Jesus comes back. He resurrects, but we don't really talk about a lot of what he does the next 40 days when he's still around. And then there's what the disciples do after that. There's a whole book called Acts that talks a lot about kind of how everybody makes sense of Jesus' life after he dies. So that's some pretty interesting stuff too. Then you get Paul on the road to Damascus. And if Paul had never, given into the vision on the road to Damascus, Paul might never have written all those letters, and therefore the faith might never have spread. Paul's a really, really, really important person when it comes to the Bible. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that Paul says and some of the ways that Paul tries to convince the Romans. There's some really good passages in some of those letters. And of course, you got the whole Revelation stories stuff at the end, which is very confusing. And still not totally sure if anybody really fully understands exactly what's going on in the book of Revelation. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Some very interesting prayers and lessons and axioms in the Bible that we got to get into. The Ten Commandments, of course. What's going on there? All these covenants and rules. This massive, massive fixation on circumcision across the Bible, including the story of David being commanded by Saul to go bring him back the foreskins in a bag of 100 Philistines, which he had to go kill, I guess circumcise, take their foreskins, put them in a bag, and bring them back to Saul, all as a dowry for Saul's daughter. There's a lot of circumcision in the Bible, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also periods where like they kind of forget to circumcise people. The Sermon on the Mount, that's where like the Our Father shows up. It's kind of one of the fun things you're reading through the Bible. You like pick a random page and you start reading, and then all of a sudden you stumble into something that's like, oh yeah, I know that. These things like the Our Father shows up. You're just like reading along. That bird song, that famous "Time for Every Purpose" song, shows up. Yeah, see, it's a good one. We'll get to that as we go through the Bible. There's that really nice little letter from Paul, about how love is kind. What is love? What is love? And then, of course, there's the many, many, many inexplicable or seemingly inexplicable oddities within the Bible. Things that, if you are a person of faith, you have to sort of rack your brain a lot to reconcile. I think part of the power of the Bible is that it's not like just totally straightforward. Some of the injustices of life, the Bible tries to kind of like make sense of. And sometimes it doesn't always seem fair. God at times is like pretty jealous and pretty angry. God will put you through a lot of trials and tribulations, but he doesn't want you to complain. He wants you to retain your faith. Now, if this was like a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you'd wonder, like, this person is, in a way, kind of like torturing you, and then they're like getting mad at you when you get mad at them for torturing you. It's like, doesn't that kind of feel like gaslighting? But no. No, we have to sort of make sense of what God is doing, the jealous and angry God. It's a jealous and angry God that is like, at times, incredibly jubilant about the conquest, and in some cases, like the torture of enemies. Why does God do that in the Old Testament? And then why is God so much more loving and nice in the New Testament? Why are there such seemingly disproportionate punishments for things in the Bible? Why is it that, like, if you're an unruly teenager, you deserve to get stoned? Why is it that, like, if you disbelieve within your family's supposed to stone you? There's a lot of stoning going on in parts of the Old Testament. Why is there so much damn circumcision going on? There's a lot of circumcision. There's a lot of other rules too, but like circumcision comes up again and again and again and again and again and again. So, what's going on? Obviously, many, many, many very lengthy genealogies. Like some of that's like, what are we doing here? Why is this in the Bible? Why did we just go from like some stories into like now we're just going through like lists of names and these inexplicable numbers of years that people lived? I mean, what secret health remedies did they know of back, 2,000-3,000 years ago when like seemingly everybody lived like 900 years? Actually, not that many people lived 900 years, but some people lived 900 years. You had like Methuselah lived to 969 years old. Longest living person in the entire Bible. Why? I mean, even Moses didn't live that long. And then, yeah, lots and lots and lots and lots of very, very, very weird laws across the pages of the Bible. Things where God gives like really, really, really detailed instructions about how to build the temple to him. And I don't know why God is so like specific about that. God's like, if you try to actually put a personality around God, it is very perplexing. Very hard to understand. So, that is our introduction to the Bible. There is a lot more to delve into. And we are going to do our best to try to tell the story of the entire Bible. Has anybody like actually read the Bible like cover to cover? Like, and like, hey, drop a couple things here in the chat, guys. I'm going to poll here today, but I am curious. Drop a couple things here in the chat. Number one, how much of the Bible would you say you have read? Is there anybody here who's read the entire Bible? Because, like, that's a lot. That's a lot. You know, I grew up reading, you know, I took 12 years of biblical history growing up, but I don't think I read the entire Bible. And it is interesting when you go through it, basically sort of like, you read it like a book. It is quite interesting. Common the Chaos, Jeanette, you guys have read it? Rainmaker continues to read the Bible. Well, cool. Well, then we'll get to do this together. It's very exciting. General Pubic got tripped up in the weeds of the genealogies. Yeah, it's a very weird thing to listen to as an audiobook. You know, and you know some of that's translation stuff, but yes, it's you do get sort of lost in those genealogies. And then, what is everybody's favorite story from the Bible? Like, drop here in the chat if you have a favorite story. What is your favorite story, or your favorite anything from the Bible? I'm curious, guys, because I don't know what we should focus the most on as we delve into it. So again, we talked about doing this for a long time, and I've racked my brain for a long time, like how to best tackle the Bible. Where to even dig in? Anyway, I hope this is a little bit of a helpful and interesting little background on it. Like I said, from now on, what we're going to do is we're basically going to start from the very beginning, and we're just going to kind of go through the Bible. And we'll do this, you know, maybe not every day. We'll sort of space it out a bit, and we do some other things. Obviously, there's news going on in the world, and there is, you know, other lighter stuff we might want to get into from time to time. But we're going to try to do this and just kind of crank our way through. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. I know a lot of people have been interested in tackling this, so we're going to get into it. And I hope you guys will stick with us as we do. Obviously not tonight, but on coming nights, we'll get into some of these stories. So we have some preferences here. Common the Chaos likes Daniel in the Lion's Den as a story. Separates fear and faith. Rainmaker, the brothers in the furnace. J. Luther, Jonah and the Whale. Oh, it's told by Jordan Peterson. Very interesting. I don't think I can compete with Jordan Peterson at, you know, telling the story behind the story on some of these things. But we're going to do our best. The story of Jael in Judges. Okay. Rainmaker, the story of Abraham being the father of many nations and tribes. Yeah, Abraham was very important. Yeah. I mean, we're not going to be able to do every single little story. We don't have the time for that. There's too many. But we're going to try to get into as many of the stories as we possibly can. Some of them you need to actually hear the real text, and then some of them are better paraphrased. So I'm going to try to figure out the right cadence for how to do this. I have like 300 pages of notes for this, guys, and I have many hundreds of slides. So this is taking some work to get this up and running. So anyway, I hope this is interesting and worth our time. Flat T says do one story from every book. We're going to try to do at least one from every book, Flat T. I think we'll be able to do a couple from every book. And by the way, guys, if you are just joining us later, I see some new names in the chat. So, welcome to everyone. And, thanks for not forgetting about us on the days when we've been away. And thanks for kind of hanging out with us here as we have, started digging into the Bible. There's a lot to dig into, as you can imagine. And then, what's the relevance of all of this in our modern world? What is the relevance of the Bible? I feel like we live in an age of, people are always like selfish and such. You're always, focused on vanity. Seems like we live in an age of a lot of these sort of like secular things that are sort of grafting into the world of religion, like people sort of treating things in their everyday lives or sort of belief systems about politics and whatnot almost as though they are religions. Whether that's like, sort of treating something like, climate change or a particular, demagogue type leader almost the way you would treat, a false idol in the Bible. Or whether you sort of believe in these kind of trendy fads of, various, wokishness, for instance. A lot of things sort of standing in for religion in a way. We've actually got a lot of issues, in the world right now. Well, a lot of good in the world, too. Like, humans have done a lot for each other over the course of the last many centuries. And we've put together societies that, by and large, are pretty humane. But Rainmaker says most of our morals come from the Bible. Doesn't the Bible teach you values? Says Calming the Chaos. Spyman, how about the catastrophes that are forecast to hit this planet at the end of time? Parting of the Red Sea is pretty big. Yeah, that's a pretty remarkable thing. It's a pretty remarkable thing. There's a lot that's kind of remarkable in the Bible. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got from somebody was, whenever you have a difficult life decision to make and you can't quite decide what to do, open the Bible to a random page and just start reading. The Bible is not the only source of wisdom that exists in the world. The Proverbs that are in the Bible are not the only proverbial things. The Psalms are not the only beautiful pieces of lyrical writing. There are profound things that come from elsewhere as well, but there's a lot in the Bible. And so you can always find something that will probably inspire you in some way or another. And I do think, by the way, that it helps to understand a bit of the structure of what's going on, because I do think there are a lot of people that are intimidated by the Bible, don't really understand exactly what the cadence of the books and the stories are. So again, I hope this stream is helpful a little bit to kind of understand the basic crux of what's going on. Let's see. We, by the way, are drinking strawberry watermelon fizzy water tonight. This is a Polar seltzer water. I think Polar is the best brand of the seltzer waters that I have had anyway. And this is not their best flavor, but it is a flavor. I'm actually not a huge fan of this flavor. It kind of tastes like amoxicillin mixed with water and some carbonation. But I think like the cranberry lime, the raspberry, I don't know, raspberry lime, raspberry pomegranate, something like that. Those are pretty good flavors. But I would definitely recommend the Polar brand. They're not a sponsor here, but they're pretty good. Ah, let's see. Jesus gave us a like. Well, if anybody else hasn't given us a like, I appreciate the likes. The Bible is so supernatural. If you claimed any of the events in the Bible were occurring today, you would be in a padded cell, says J. Luther. There's a lot of supernatural in the Bible. Adrian Gutierrez, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Yeah, we'll get into some John, Adrian. I think John is one of the more interesting books in the Bible. Yeah, I like things in general that are well written. And I think the most well written of the Gospels are John and Luke, if I had to pick. J. Luther, see you all in the Garden of Eden. That's, well, I guess we'll start with like a vast nothingness, and then we'll eventually work our way to the Garden of Eden. And we'll talk a little bit about where the Garden of Eden actually is. When I was growing up, there was a potato chip company called the Garden of Eaton, and they made some very healthy but not very tasty potato chips, like black bean chips, and I don't know if that's what they had in the Garden of Eden. Be careful of BPA-lined cans. Okay, good PSA there, General Pubic. General Pubic, give us a good Midwestern goodbye. Keep it going for 45 minutes more. Well, we can't go too long here because it is late at night, and it's a weeknight. So we got a lot to come back to in the coming days. So I hope you guys won't be strangers for this, because I think this could be interesting. Again, if you haven't dropped a like or subscribe in the video, one more plug. Drop a like, drop a subscribe. Check the description for links to our Discord and our Duck Fund. Appreciate the work of our mods here tonight on Land Speculation on YouTube. We got Quiet Castle, we got Jeanette, we got Bequeathius in the house, so very much appreciate all the work of our mods, always. We probably should pick a winner for tonight if we haven't. Oh, the winner was God. Oh, do we not have the bots on? I guess that could explain things. Well, there's a lot of instructions in the Bible for how to make sacrifices to God. And I don't know if God needs the 2 cents, but my guess would be, having read big chunks of the Bible, that what God seems to really like are burned animals. So I guess we'll try to dredge up some kind of calf or something, and then we'll burn it. And hopefully that'll, make for good futures for everyone. Yummy pig roast. I don't think you're supposed to eat the sacrifice you make to God. And you are definitely, definitely, definitely not supposed to worship false idols. Adrian Gutierrez, those sacrifices were in the Old Testament for the atonement of our sins. When Jesus came to earth, he was the ultimate sacrifice for our sins. That is why he is our Savior. The priests eat the sacrificed animals. That's how they live, says Bequeathius. Jeanette says, yes, people ate the sacrifices to the gods. Ah. All right, guys, there is lots of very interesting stuff that we got to dig into coming up. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are looking forward to it too. Again, we'll tackle news as it breaks and other things, and maybe depending on how it feels, we'll lighten things up with some brackets and other things along the way. But look for some more Bible streams in the coming days and weeks, and I hope it will be interesting for people. But for now, it's getting pretty late. So I'm going to sign off here for the moment. So, again, I appreciate the conversation, appreciate the work of our mods. Again, appreciate all the likes and the subscribes and all that kind of stuff. Landspeculation@gmail.com is the email address if you want to reach out. Tackle wind as it breaks, too. Has anybody done the counting? The average person farts 31 times a day. Has anybody tried to count? Somebody's got to do it one of these days. Our Agent Gary Gutierrez, I think I feel guilty. You were leaving. I mean, I do have to sleep. I'll leave the stream up, though. If you guys want to keep chatting, please feel free. We could do a Scientology stream, Lucky. That would actually be quite interesting. I think I find Scientology very interesting. I can certainly see its appeal, and I actually think that would be a fascinating topic for Stream Lucky. So maybe at some point we will. The Bible bracket. I mean, I'm totally down to do a Bible bracket around this stuff. If you guys don't get too Bibled out, we will definitely do a Bible bracket as part of all this, which I think could be very interesting. Of course, I don't know how to make Jesus not the winner. We might have to leave Jesus out of the bracket and just assume that Jesus is sort of on a whole different level than everything else. But maybe we'll see. We'll see. I can't imagine any other characters beating Jesus. I mean, other than maybe just God. I don't know. But I think Bible characters would be very interesting as a bracket. So we'll maybe think about that. And again, by the way, guys, I know people are coming at this from sort of all different faith perspectives and levels of, commitment and belief when it comes to the Bible. And so our intent is going to do this as sort of earnestly and respectfully and kind of deeply as we possibly can. In a way that can sort of speak both to people who don't believe in the Bible and for people for whom the Bible is the sort of foundation of life, and the inspired Word of God. And, I hope you guys will sort of bear with us as we kind of go through it as earnestly as we possibly can. So, you're never going to make everyone happy with a subject like this, but thanks everyone for being civil. Yes, absolutely. And I think this has been a nice discussion tonight, guys, so I appreciate that. Oh, Spyman? Spyman wins? Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. Everybody gets 2 cents tonight. Why not? Why not? Let's splurge. Adrian wants us to read the Book of Revelation. We will read some of the Book of Revelation, Adrian. It'll take us a while to get there, I think, because we got a whole bunch of books to get through first. Anyway, guys, appreciate the conversation. We're going to be back here on Land Speculation. Don't be strangers. Shoot me your thoughts, your ideas, all that kind of stuff. You guys know how to reach me. Again, like, subscribe, Discord, Duck Fun. Thanks to our mods. Thanks to you guys for the conversations, all that kind of stuff. Don't be strangers. We will be back. This is Land, that ancient speculation. And for now, I hope you guys all have a good night.